just too many questions. I hope I'm never satisfied. Yeah, I hope I'm never satisfied. And it feels so good to be misunderstood. It feels so good to be misunderstood. It feels so good to be misunderstood. Yeah, it feels so good. Yeah, it feels so good.
A-cups! Hello. Ooh. There we go. Welcome to A-Cups. We're back again. Anne is finally back from vacation.
Woohoo!
And I'm here again, Angela Washko. And this week we're here with digital artist Carla Gannis.
Woohoo!
And she's also very excited. We'll give her a chance to talk a little bit about her work in a second. But first, Anne brought something in that she wants to talk about, or I guess we all want to talk about.
I think this is something that probably a lot of us saw on the internet, but it was Jay-Z rapping in Pace Gallery for 6 hours with lots of other art celebrities, very much who's who.
Important people of the art world. With quotes, air quotes.
I guess the most famous interaction was Jay-Z and Marina Abramovich.
Or at least the most frequently vined, I guess. Maybe.
So yeah, I think a lot of people had a lot of differing opinions on this. Either it was awesome. I think Jerry Saltz wrote that he loved it and he thought it was great, even though he went in with some skepticism. And then some people were like, this is just celebrity trash. So let's turn to our guest, Carla, on your thoughts on this performance.
Well, it was really interesting because one thing, most of us experienced it via the internet and not there. And when I was reading Jerry Saltz's response to everything, and he even used the word tribal, and that it was really exciting and it got tribal. And I'm like, well, yeah, I can totally understand because Jay-Z, has a lot of charisma, and that is, pretty kind of fantastic to rap for that amount of time. But, I mean, I think that that's basically part of his practice anyway. And in response, like my partner, I brought in his tweet because I love this tweet. He said, so Jay-Z was a hit at Pace. Does that mean Senator Wendy Davis's next stop is Gagosian? And then hashtag filibuster rhymes. And then I replied that she deserved MoMA for that. And, I don't take issue with the fact a lot of celebrities are kind of doing art performance now.
Is that new though? Like, it's not that new.
Yeah, I guess it's not that new, but it just seems like there's been a spate of them recently.
Yeah.
And I guess it's easy at first to just be like, oh, well, we've got to defend the sanctity of art, and art is this serious practice, and what does it mean for a celebrity to come in who's a millionaire or whatever. But like a lot of people had a good time, so I don't have or take issue with that. But I actually do think that Wendy Davis should get her time at MoMA.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like a space like Pace Gallery is already a very known, like, commercially oriented space. So to me, it's like no surprise to see somebody who's already very established in whatever field doing something there.
Well, yeah, you guys remember Paul Haida like 2 years ago when he did the piece at Pace, and it was all about kind of celebrity. And I mean, and they already are kind of known for that. So it's not like outside of the realm of it, expectations.
I just wish the form was more interesting because, I mean, it made me think about, like, Andy Warhol's TV on MTV and sort of bringing in celebrities into his art practice, like Pee Wee Herman just talking about himself or whatever, or, like, his bodyguards and stuff. Like, I don't know, I just, if it broke, like, some form of, I don't know, if it just wasn't 6 hours of endurance lip-syncing with art world insiders, like, I'm not that psyched to see, like, Rosalie Goldberg participating somehow. Like, I don't know, it just reinforces this importance that I think is there that is already
the stratification, you know, it's kind of like an art world, like, class-based system, and it's kind of like, oh, yeah, if you're, part of that kind of upper echelon, you get invited. Although it was cool that, Jerry Saltz brought in, like, the security guard, who wanted to meet him. He was like, oh, come on in and, participate. And I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, but that he had to do that is already problematic, I think.
Yeah.
There were some younger artists who did get to participate also, which was nice. And I think the most interesting part of the performance was seeing who could match his presence as a performer, because he's such an amazing performer.
Right.
And everyone was saying no one could top him or even come close to his presence, except for people were saying Marina Abramovich was the only person who made him feel uncomfortable. So it became this like game of who can outperform Jay-Z.
Oh, well, and he was inspired by her. Like the piece
Yeah.
was admittedly inspired by her.
But I don't know, I guess it gets into also like what the difference is between like being a like entertainer where it's your job to captivate people for a certain amount of time all the time, and then sort of, I don't know, I think that's a different kind of playing field that you're talking about.
Well, I think the best performance artists are artists who are really engaging as performers. Like, they can command attention, someone like Lady Gaga. But also, like, in addition to that, they're also someone who has that critical, artistic lens as well. So it's the combination between being a great performer, being a great entertainer, and also having that critical lens.
And not being pretentious. I mean, that's one thing. You know, it's kind of like, okay, he has a huge audience, and people in the art world, or the art world that we're talking about right here, I mean, it's a much more cloistered, closed environment, you know, and it's a different bar, you know, in terms of our expectations of performance and entertainment. You know, we're not supposed to be entertained all the time. We're supposed to be kind of educated, or we're supposed to feel something else, or it's supposed to be more deeply philosophical, but that's not always the case. And, you know, those boundaries have been, you know, blurred for some time now. I mean, you know, not even starting with Warhol, but Warhol kind of really made that his intention.
I guess what I'm saying, though, if you're putting like somebody who's not a performer, like not a performer who gets to participate on the same sort of like, this person has to like compete for stage presence.
But
was
it really competing with Jay-Z? I mean, that's what I'm wondering.
I don't know.
Yeah,
that was
I don't think.
Sort of the.
Yeah, I don't think that. I mean, other than other art world celebrities like Marina, then it did become kind of like a competition. You know, like, is she going to best him because she's like really cool and she's holding her hands up, and, you know, I mean, I've watched that several times. So. But I think in terms of general populace, they're more kind of just completely in awe of his celebrity. You know, he's kind of like, if we think about that, we still, even as a secular or more secular society, you know, kind of live based on myths, and we still want to kind of have these people who are like gods to us, and that's kind of what that dynamic was like.
Yeah, I think that the thing about that performance was like, oh my god, Jay-Z's gonna come into the art world, this is so exciting for us artists, we get to like be with Jay-Z and he's gonna like come down to us, and there's probably not that much money involved. I mean, at least compared to like probably what he's used to.
And that's really cool, because this guy, he started out in the projects, and then he is the exalted figure now coming to like the white box, and like that's a really interesting turn of fortunes, you know.
I don't know, but I mean, like, Diddy or P. Diddy or Puff Daddy performed on Chris Gethard's public access show. Yeah. So Chris Gethard did this campaign where he was harassing Diddy on Twitter to try and get him to be on his public access show. He was like, you know, like, I have this like really like underdog public access show that like very few people appreciate and watch, but it would mean the world for us if you just came. And there was like, no, the stakes were so low. Yeah. And he actually did it. And it was like amazing. And I think, I don't know, I feel weird about this sort of like, I don't know, there's like a backlash against Jay-Z in the art world about like, this is the end of performance, blah, blah, blah. And I'm kind of just like, I don't know, it was a gesture, it was cool. Like, some people loved it.
Magda, like, you know, she was the one who like was quoted in that tweet of saying, this is the end of performance art. And then she later said, that's shorthand. I mean, we know performance art isn't really dead. You know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, that's how social media forces you to communicate sometimes.
Right, and simplify,
and
something
and
that's...
be the most extreme version of yourself so that you get heard and all this sort of stuff.
Totally.
So.
Great, well, now I think we're going to have Carla talk a little bit about her work, so you all become familiar with her and what she does. So.
If you aren't already.
Yes.
Well, my full name is Carla Gannis, and I'm a digital artist, a reformed painter. That's kind of where I come from. And I don't have any... This is really interesting, because the other night I ran into someone, and they were like talking about a work they'd seen of mine recently, and they were like, that doesn't seem like your aesthetic. And I think kind of my aesthetic is that I'm always changing. I mean, most of my work has kind of some narrative base to it and deals with sexuality in class and all of these sort of things, but using digital technology to kind of recontextualize, certain norms or mores or different things that I try to kind of turn the screw on, like, recontextualize them in, a 21st century context. How's that?
That was fast.
Oh.
Wow. That was concision at its finest.
Thank you.
All right, well then I guess we'll get into some questions that we have for Carla. That was awesome. I don't think I could ever do something so quickly like that. It was awesome. Well, I wanted to start a little bit. We're talking about
Prosecco.
Why does everybody who comes on here have to mark that they're already drunk? Come on. All right. Since we were already talking a little bit about social media, I wanted to get into, like, obviously, I admire you a lot as an artist, but I also admire your voice in social media because I think it's hard to be a strong sort of feminist voice in the digital arts and technology sort of sphere. And I was wondering, now that we're talking about Marina Abramovich a little, and she blatantly says that she doesn't consider herself a feminist, and she's such, to me, was like, when I was learning about performance art, to me, like, an obvious, like, beacon of feminist performance art.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, do you consider yourself a feminist, and how has your participation in social media impacted and changed your practice?
I definitely consider myself a feminist, and I'm so glad that I'm sitting with two women who are kind of like the next generation of feminist artists, and they proudly proclaim themselves to be feminists, because it's not just Marina Abramovic, it's Vanessa Beecroft. A couple of years ago, she was like, oh, my mother was a tree hugger feminist, and, I totally rebuke that. And I'm like, really? You're kidding me. Like, you just don't get it. What? Yeah. And a few years ago, 2005, actually, and this is a little prior to, like, really social media ubiquity, I curated a show, and it was called Multiple Partners, and I chose 5 female co-curators, and we each chose 2 or more men to participate with us in the show to kind of reflect, based on a Jerry Saltz article, to reflect the statistics of men to women getting, shows in New York. I mean, not just galleries, but like higher institutional shows, and that kind of representation, because it's kind of like equal, but then once we go further up, it starts to really change. And in doing that show, when I was writing the press release, I had a few of these women who are kind of my generation who are like, oh, we can't use a feminist word. And I was like, why not? And, and it was just really disheartening to me to realized that it had really become the other F word. And with social media, I've done all sorts of projects, and prior to social media, I had an alter ego I used to kind of talk through, Sister Gemini, and kind of in the early 2000s, early noughts. And then with social media, I felt some kind of liberation. And then I also have a few projects that no one even knows because they're not attributed to me, that I've been kind of doing experiments from or experiments with. And I really appreciate, like, being able to kind of try out different voices. And there's a little, more autonomy there. But, also Web 2.0 is about kind of being yourself. Web 1.0 was more, you can be anonymous, you can be all of these different things. And Web 2.0 and social media has been about representing yourself. And I've actually appreciated that too, because when I was in my 20s, I had, kind of self-esteem issues. And I was like, well, wait, okay, can I have a voice? I'm this girl from the South. And, there were all sorts of kind of conflicts I had about my identity, about being a feminist. I was on a panel and this girl comes up to me and she's like, you wear makeup, you can't really be a feminist. This was down South. And I was like, really? And then I talked to you guys recently about this. I read this book in 2000 called Manifesta, and it rocked my world, because it was like, oh, wow, yes, I can be a complex human being filled with, I can be filled with contradictions and still be a feminist and still, believe in rights for women. So, yeah. Okay, I think that's it.
I'm curious, are you able to talk about the projects that you haven't attributed to yourself, or you don't want to talk about those? Because that just kind of sparked my interest.
Well, there's one project, and this was kind of interesting to me in terms of secrets, and that, someone like Anais Nin wrote all of these diaries, and she didn't publish them until later, when certain people who would be affected by the content had died. And so I have this one blog, and I won't give up the address, and it's a locked blog, but like there's some irony that I'm still posting it online. I'm not keeping it in a private, analog journal, but like I have it password protected. And for some reason I'm enjoying that right now, and I'm enjoying having kind of this secret project that like may one day be discovered. So,
does anyone else know about this project? Does anyone else have the password?
Ooh.
One other person. Yeah.
Oh shit. Why do you think that people are afraid of being, I mean, this is like a complex question maybe, but why do you think people are afraid of being labeled as feminists right now?
Well, I think because a lot of it is still, for whatever reasons, associated with earlier waves. And so there's still this kind of assumption that it's kind of militaristic, or it's about women being better than men. And, that's really not the case. And we all know that,
But, oh God, every time, like, I think that in and of itself is a misconception. Because when I think about Gloria Steinem, like, that's...
Okay, wait. I've got something here.
Because I think, like, I can't remember if I said this on another podcast or if I said it off microphone, but people have this assumption that Gloria Steinem and her wave of feminism is militaristic, they hate men, blah, 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 blah.
Okay.
And that's so not the case at all. And I think that that's something that the media has whipped about around
it's like
her.
the 1 and 0 sort of binary sort
what
of
we were talking about.
Yeah.
And like you have to compartmentalize a person, and you have to have a soundbite for a person. And like that's how we kind of receive things and how we receive knowledge today. And it's like, okay, I've got the soundbite for that person. But, okay, to that point, I brought in this book, and I love this book. Okay, it's a gold book, and it's called Wonder Woman, and it's a Ms. Book publication from 1972 with a foreword from Gloria Steinem. And she's talking about Wonder Woman and how Wonder Woman was so influential to her as a young child because, at first she's reading about all these superheroes and that, like women basically, don't have any other purpose but to like serve men and be saved by men.
Right.
And then she reads about Wonder Woman, who was created by the man who also created the lie detector test. Marston, I think, was his name. And so she's writing about this, and she's like, well, she's a complex character, and I'm a kid, and I'm reading about her, and it's a comic book, so it's not going to be like really profound, narrative, but just the same. That was like a role model for me. She said, but there's times where they didn't get it right, and it's written by a man, by the way.
Yeah.
And one problem or one issue I took with it was that sometimes they made Wonder Woman and the Amazon superior to men. And she's like, and I don't support that at all. She wrote that in 1972.
Yeah.
I have it right here, in the preface of this book. And I'm just kind of like, no, anyone who actually read Gloria Steinem and didn't just read like the Wikipedia entry or the like blurb
or
about
the
her.
91 Urban Dictionary definition.
Yeah. Well, actually understand that it's a much more subtle argument, and it's a much more subtle defense of like equal rights for women.
Right.
And it's not, and it's not about like, this starts with Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who wrote the Yellow Wallpaper, and this is kind of turn of the century stuff and turn of the 19th to 20th century, Yellow Wallpaper and Herland. And I remember reading Herland, and it's basically a place where women have found a way to reproduce without men, and there's no war and all of these things. And I'm reading it, and I was like, well, this is kind of problematic. Yeah. But just the same, like women are already starting to think about, okay, she's like kind of radical, but it's the turn of the century. By the time we get to Gloria Steinem, she's not as radical as everyone thinks she is. She's like, okay, how can we actually...
She's very practical.
Yeah, like coexist, and actually women are no longer subjugated, after thousands of years of being so. Yeah.
And I think just in my own experience that it seems like recently in the past couple of years, it seems less and less of a taboo to say that you are a feminist.
Which is so cool.
Yeah.
Like
I think in certain spaces, though.
In certain
I don't know.
spaces,
I think it changes from urban to rural, from...
But I think it starts, in the spaces that we exist in the more liberal spaces, and then kind of moves outward, and just the fact that, like, in the spaces that we exist in, it's become trendy even.
Yeah.
I think that's really great.
Well, and, again, we have to think about kind of our networks, because it's really interesting in terms of the internet, and your original question about like my feminism in relation to the internet, and social media, more specifically yours with social media. But like, we talk about the or it's spoken about like the global village, right? And we're all interconnected, but we are actually more tribal now because we choose these little villages, we choose these tribes.
We follow 400 people.
Yeah, and we no longer share the same news sources. We've chosen and have our very specific exclusive sources. And within that, I often feel like, wow, well, everybody agrees with me. And then when I go back to the town that I grew up in of 7,000 people and, the South, and like this bill that was like being passed last week, it's called the motorcycle bill, but it's basically an anti-abortion bill that's being passed in North Carolina right now. I'm like, oh my God, my reality is not the overall reality. So we still have a lot of work to do is basically
for sure. But even just the fact that like the term sex trafficking, like I can go home and people know what that is.
Oh yeah,
that's amazing to me.
Sure.
But time to move on.
Oh, okay. You're good at that.
That's Anne's job, by the way, if our frequent listeners haven't realized that.
So my question for Carla and your work. So your project, What's Not on My Mind, which is a series of digital drawings, which I'll sort of describe them. They're kind of like almost like Hieronymus Bosch meets Manet, but in a contemporary way. So people having sex and with their laptops. So sort of like old landscape painting portrayed in like a contemporary manner. And you talk about this series in terms of the collective mind, because you say what's not on my mind, because everything's on our mind. In the collective mind, everything is on all of our minds. So I guess I'm specifically interested in the imagery. Like there's a lot of like combination of like sex and technology, like people lying on like a hump of computers and all this stuff. So I'm interested in like how do you see technology and sex working together within the collective unconscious?
Well, it's really interesting because, there are all sorts of terms bandied about like technolust, and in kind of early days of cyber feminism, like kind of coming to terms with, a different take on our sexuality. I'm trying to get that word out. Sexuality. Yes, I say that strongly. And so in that piece, or that actually like a whole body of work, there's one long piece called The Park that I did where like there are all of these people who are kind of disengaged other than sexually or with their, kind of machines and their technology. And I guess I was thinking about like our new ways of interacting, in general, and that earlier tonight we all talked about, how people meet today and different relationships we've had that weren't in real life, relationships that sometimes seem like they're really deep and they're really intimate or they're even really sexual and we've never even met the person, or we've never really had any, physically. Yeah. But yeah, that's a good point because we've met the person and sometimes you feel like this person more deeply. And so then I'm using these tropes. I'm like making this look like some kind of Manet landscape, like luncheon on the grass, right? And luncheon on the grass with people having sex and, with headphones and their laptops, right? And trying to kind of deal with like our art history and this lineage of, how people get together and convene in a public space and what happens and how would I kind of represent that visually when we don't really do that. And so I'm kind of imagining something that really is kind of half 19th century, plein air painting and then 21st century Second Life, avatar culture, right? And so it's kind of playing or trying to, work with hybridity. And because I think that more and more we are reconciling ourselves to a kind of hybrid existence where we're not even half online or half offline. I think more and more it's more porous and we're not even distinguishing on or off.
Yeah.
And like even my dreams have changed in the past few years and my positionality in a dream, it's kind of like, oh, there are monitors in dreams and the dynamics and the way I communicate with people actually represents this new way we exist, in waking life. So
Sorry, we have some strange sounds in the studio. Okay, I mean, we talk about porn. This is in direct response to what you just said. I mean, we talk about porn most episodes on this podcast, as it turns out, but, like, I can't help but, like, when I looked at these pieces, think about, like, what's on those screens, 'cause a lot of those screens are blank, and then I think about, so it got me thinking about, like, oh, okay, if they're naked and they're in the park and they're with the computers, like, they're looking at porn, and, like, then it got me thinking, like, about porn beyond, like, what you're looking at on the screen, which is a person, but, like, you're kind of having sex with your computer, and, like, I never really thought about it that way until I looked at those pieces.
Right, because you see, like, the physical naked person.
Yeah, the naked person with the computer without the image, and then, but my mind fills in that image, and then I'm like, oh my god, like, they're having sex with the computer, though. I don't know. So I don't know. How do you? Was that, like, something that you put into the work, or, like, did you? I mean, obviously, you must have been thinking about porn and computers when you were making this work.
Yeah, and I've thought about that for a long time. I've thought about porn for a long time. But, you know, as a woman, I mentioned to you guys earlier, like, when I was a kid, I found my dad's Playboys because, you know, back in the day, men actually used to buy magazines and look at them there, you know, and, like, that was totally acceptable. That's cool. I found them under the bed, and I, like, asked my mom, I'm like, okay, what's up with this? And, you know, all these naked women. And so my mother goes out and buys me a Playgirl, and she's like, I just want you to know it goes both ways. But it
Which
doesn't.
Which is incredible, by the way.
Yeah, and it's really cool. And I thank her for that. And I thank her for multiple things because it kind of, you know, encouraged me to not kind of just adopt particular attitudes in the place I was growing up and to venture out and go to New York. But also, despite that, it's not the same.
Right.
So for a long time, I've been kind of, you know, taking the temperature or trying to kind of suss out, like, how I feel about porn, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, earlier projects I did in the late 90s or 2000, I did this one project where I was... because, I have to mention this, because in the, like, late 90s, a lot of artists who maybe were more traditionally trained as painters or sculptors or whatever learned web design skills, because we were all like, we're tired of assisting artists for $10 an hour, so we're going to all learn web design skills. And we did so, and we all start working at web agencies. But, like, at the time, you know, getting work at a porn, you know, place was, like, actually kind of good money. And so, you know, and I had a lot of friends who either started to do porn websites or actually established their own, because they were like, we're artists and we never make money, and, like, we finally found a way to do it. And so I did this one project where I was taking these silhouettes from all of these porn sites, and then I was using stock footage of, like, the perfect family unit underneath it, and so that you could kind of get double reads, right? And so that was one project where I worked on. And then a lot of my work kind of deals with, like, that uncomfortable zone between erotica and porn, and, like, where do we draw the line? And at this point, based on an earlier question you had, Anne, about this kind of secret project, I'm going to read one piece from my secret project about a woman's relationship to porn. And in this project that I've been working on, every kind of, there are, like, stanzas, but every, and it'll be hard to get this, you know, via audio, but it's all 140 characters, so it's all kind of tweeted out. Okay, so it begins. Meta. She types into the search field, guy porn for women. Did you mean gay porn for women? The engine queries. She enters a site that looks like it was built in 1995. She checks out the source code. Meta name equal description. Content equal free porn for women. Naked straight guys with big hard cocks and muscular bodies. Free erotica for women. She likes the idea of free erotica. In most of her relationships, she's always had to pay for it in one way or another. And getting into the tags, meta name equals robots, content equals index follow, meta name equals revisit after content equals 14 days. Robots, she thinks. Will these male specimens be robots, cyborgs, real dolls that she can plug and play? Alas, these robots are tiny chunks of code. Flies, really, trying to attract spiders who will weave them into the web. Sans serif font, better than Comic Sans or Impact, but a sickly, ambivalent color of yellow, most of it typed in italics or bold or an electric blue background. Ladies, it's time for total satisfaction. Headlines an image of a 20-something man reclining, eyes closed, a silver choker around his neck, his erect member clasped by his left hand. His fingers have no fake square nail tips like the chicks have. A brown-haired lad with a buzz cut. For the girls is the hottest new site for women on the net. Follows as the subheader. Females are first called to action as ladies equals class, then girls equals fun, then women, a criminal offense to be here if under the age of 18. She continues to scan the page. There is a large enter button at the bottom, set within a table that looks like an Excel spreadsheet. Gallery 1. Hulk-like men, tattoos, baseball caps, slick back hair. One dips his hands into the ocean, direct gaze into the camera. You. He's looking at you. Gallery 2. Now she gets army fatigues, cock rings, and there's more description of what this net site offers. And then another stanza, erotica versus porn. I'm almost done. As women's porno, we have galleries of gorgeous hunks. Might be your next door neighbor. She wonders if the 400-pound guy down the hall was really just wearing a fat suit. At night, he unzips it for some special lady neighbor or another, revealing his six-pack abs and his Dionysian phallus. There is a hyperlink for more erotica for women. She pauses, opens up a new web browser, and types in erotica. It is usually distinguished from pornography, which can also have literary merit, but which is usually understood to have sexual arousal as its main purpose. Gloria Steinem offers her judgment. Though both erotica and pornography refer to verbal or pictorial representations of sexual behavior, they are as different as a room with doors open and one with doors locked. The first might be a home, but the second could only be a prison. Dworkin seems less judgmental. Erotica is simply high-class pornography. Better produced, better conceived, better executed, better packaged, designed for a better class of consumer. She returns to the porn site, closes it, clears her cache and browsing history. It's an old habit, completely useless. The camera and other hardware in the lab have captured all the minutia of the scene. Every keystroke was recorded, every gesture in her face as she analyzed the prototypically handsome male specimens. The initial results that have been gathered aren't that surprising, and she undresses now. She stands in front of the mirror, surveying her attenuated frame, her pale, freckled skin. She was allowed to keep her skin. She applies eyeliner and lipstick in preparation for her next test. And that was a little lengthy, more than I expected, but I wrote that kind of trying to parse my own relationship to pornography, because a lot of times I experienced it through men and the male gaze, and even searching for it and everything I was getting was based on men's presumptions about what it is. And so I did this search for pornography for women, and then kind of started to kind of scientifically write about it and try to kind of make some sense of the experience. So
first of all, I think that you should make that public. Whatever's in this secret blog, I like it.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
And it should be public. But also, I always wonder, why isn't Playgirl the same as Playboy? And is the reason that porn isn't the same for women as for men is for biological reasons, and I'm air quoting that, or for sociological, social reasons, and
social pressure.
Yes, I think that we've just been I think men have been socially trained or whatever to see women visually, and women have been taught to understand men or to get sexual satisfaction from other ways. So I don't know at this point if women can really appreciate pornography in the same way that men do.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of guilt in that sort of culture that is less and less ingrained in men. Young boys are starting to just sort of accept that that's something that they should do as a rite of passage.
But it's a nurture-nature thing, too. It's kind of what about biological predispositions? We know that men are more aggressive, and that's part of their biology, right? And we also know that, men
But,
hunt
sorry,
out-
I just want to stop because I don't know that is like necessarily part of
Or is
their
that just
biology.
like-
I
yeah.
think that
I don't know if that's true
I think
either.
that is socially ingrained.
Me too.
And I think that that's like also part of the problem is that people accept the idea that men are more aggressive as like a biological thing, and I'm not like entirely sure that that's true.
Well, also, I mean, if we evolve, and this is the kind of first time in recorded history, I don't know, about prior to that we're evolving based on the technologies that
Right.
we're creating,
Yeah.
And so if we're evolving in such a way, obviously, right, I shouldn't be so deterministic, like, oh my God, well, men are just, kind of encoded to be aggressive and like to look at porn and respond to women, because that's too simple.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, we shouldn't simplify in that way. I think a lot of it is societal still. And I think, like, even we can have this conversation, we can be like, oh, woohoo, a lot of women are, like, proud to say they're feminists still, but, what's fascinating, like one of your earlier conversations was kind of like, oh, well, men say they don't want a woman with makeup, and they like have, like very specific things. And then we realize, well, yeah, but they actually do. Like Elliot Spitzer, who's totally against, prostitution, still with his beautiful wife goes out and hires
wife,
prostitutes,
True that.
All right,
All right,
let's
I'm going to
move on.
switch gears.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I see Anne getting nervous over there, like, you're so off task all the time.
It's okay, but we just should move to other questions.
Well, I wanted to talk about, because one of the things as I've gotten to know you that really resonates with me is that you're an athlete and I'm an athlete and we're both runners, and your project, The Runaways, means a lot to me. I'm interested in these projections that we create of ourselves digitally, and also the goals that we make in our daily lives, what happens when we try to embody these things physically and when we compete with our like digital projection of ourselves, which is unrealistic, or maybe can you talk a little bit about The Runaways and why you made it?
Right. And we talked about this before briefly. I ran the marathon in 2010. And I trained for 7 months for that, and it was really significant to me. And at first, I wanted to make it performative, and I was going to do it in a Wonder Woman costume. And I was just like, oh my God, yeah, I'm going to do this. And then I realized it was something more than that, and that I didn't have to make everything I did in life art.
An art piece, yeah.
And I'm kind of used to that, and I was like, no, this is for other reasons that I'm doing this, and I'm going to see it through, and I'm going to run this 26 miles, and I'm not going to give up, and I'm going to run it. And it was really kind of like glorifying, like I run through the finish line and they tell me I have to stop because I kept running, and they're like, you're done, you can stop. And but after that, I was down south, and I was visiting my parents, and they live in this really small town, a different small town than the one I grew up in, and I'm spending most of my time online. Like, I'm visiting with them, but I'm also like, oh my gosh, okay, I've got to be online. And, and I'm on Second Life, I'm on various social networks, and I'm also still running while I'm down there, because that's like my one kind of outlet, when I need to just kind of have a break and be in my own head, I'm running. And so one morning I just get this idea. I'm like, talking to my mom and dad. My dad's is a videographer. I'm like, okay, get your camera, Mom, drive the truck. I'm going to run down the middle of a highway because nobody's going to be there. It was Christmas. It was actually Christmas Day. And I was like, I want to run down the middle of a highway. And I found this highway in Second Life that my avatar, Jezebel Langley, can run on. And so she's going to run against me. And it would have been cooler. I've thought about, revisiting this project where we actually did it in real time, because I ended up editing the footage, and she kind of, comes into my space, and we run this race against each other. But, I think I was thinking about, one, just my reaction to, kind of being down south. And, so there's kind of a personal reaction to all of this. And I actually felt compelled to run down the middle of a highway. But, but also, if something else that you're talking about, Angela, is these ideals and kind of like the perfect woman syndrome. And I think most of us have probably experienced this, where it's like, oh my God, I've got to be perfect. I've got to be ideal. I've got to be all of these things, whether it's through athleticism, whether it's through, various manifestations. And the marathon, I ran that for, I think other reasons, but when I was younger and I was a runner, and I had eating disorders. I had all those things that like women are plagued with, or young girls are plagued with, and those kind of things. And so, I'm thinking about my avatar, and I'm, a woman, and I'm aging, and I'm like, wow, she can be skinnier than me. She can be faster than me. She never has to stop. I actually am jealous of my avatar. You know, she can fly. She can, you know, she can teleport. Wow, that really pisses me off. Like, I want to be her, you know? And so, like, that's why I set up that dynamic. I was like, wow. You know, she's everything. It's just like my fascination with superheroes, though, you know, or I must say superheroines. Superheroines, it's, you know, and particularly Wonder Woman for me, but, you know, it's like, oh, wow, they represent this kind of empowerment. And I think, you know, any woman who has kind of had issues with, oh, I'm really smart, but I'm not pretty enough, or, oh, I'm getting attention for being pretty, but they don't think I'm smart. And you're always like, you know, trying to reconcile this. And so I did that piece because I actually had this split between my online identity, who can be way more perfect than me, and then the real self.
Well, I really love that piece.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I also admire because I do feel like there's this like tendency now with social media to kind of put everything that you do online and frame it as though it's part of your practice. And I think that there's definitely something admirable about you doing the marathon and it not being an art project.
Right. I didn't even like Foursquare during it, you know. I really just ran the thing straight through. Yeah.
But I'm like, I've never used Foursquare. Like, it's funny to be like, I didn't even Foursquare. And I'm like, I've never used
Angela
Foursquare.
doesn't even use Instagram.
I don't even use Vine.
Wow. And you are the Vine artist extraordinaire. Now that is kind of ironic. I love it.
My phone, I mean, now that my phone can actually use it, it can't handle it. It like just
that's because you have an Android, right?
But I have an older Android, so it's like not the new Android. They now have the actual application for it, but when I do it, it's just like shuts everything down. It like restarts.
Yeah, you can't. It's not good for Android.
Doesn't love it, so that's fine. We weren't meant to be. Your turn, Anne.
My turn. So in your Jezebel digital image series, in these images, you kind of take old tropes of femininity. Specifically, you know, you're from the South, so you take a lot of imagery from the South, and you combine it with kind of futuristic or more contemporary day images of women. So you're kind of creating hybrid allegories of contemporary stereotypes. So I'm wondering, so you did this project in 2008. It's only been 5 years since then, but I'm wondering, who do you think a modern-day Jezebel is? And has your idea of the Jezebel changed at all since 2008?
That's really interesting because then the magazine Jezebel was just getting started then, and I wasn't even that aware of it. And I was flying down south to give a talk on my work. I was flying down to Georgia, and I read this article about Betty Davis and Jezebel, and I'm like, you know, and I'm just like, wow, that's kind of interesting. And then I call my grandma, Pansy May, and I was like, Grandma, what do you think about a Jezebel? And she's like, oh my God, that's a bad woman, you know, and I'm like, wow, I want to reconsider that, you know. And, you know, at the time I was dealing with film tropes primarily and kind of historical figures. Like I dealt with Anne Hutchinson, who was, there was a book that was published at the time, The American Jezebel, and Margaret Atwood, and Piaf, and Jade, the photojournalist in Beyond Good and Evil. I was just like, she was cool, so I had a video game character. But, you know, it really has changed. And as I was, like, thinking about this before I got here tonight, I was like, oh, wow, though, you know, like, a lot of my people, and when I say my people, like, the women that I've been influenced with are from a particular, like, kind of generation. And I was like, oh wow, like the two people I'm sitting next to you tonight, I hope you don't mind that I'm calling you two Jezebels, because you are like perfect Jezebels in terms of my conception of what that is. And my conception of a Jezebel is like an empowered woman who talks too much and she pisses off men for being empowered, and that's a really good thing, and we finally gotten to a point where we embrace that. So yeah, you're both Jezebels.
Yeah, high five.
Woohoo!
Oh my God,
I almost broke the microphone with that. So So that's all you got for that?
I mean, I've got a list. Like, I brought a list, but like, I mean, it's just, it's a mix of like old and new. So I'm going to try to wrap it. No, I'm kidding. I've got Carolee Schneemann, Judy Chicago, Anna Mendieta, but like, these are like kind of earlier generation. Katarina Kozra, Mia Yanadi, the Grandmother series. I love that one. Latoya Ruba Frazier, Tracy Emin, Anna Gaskell, Sandra Bermudez, really interesting artist, Sophie Cow, Lynn Hirschman, Andrea Frazier, Elisa Kreisinger, Jennifer Chan, Karen O. I used to live with the Yeah Yeah Yeahs a long time ago. Laura Nakadati, Laura Parnes. I'm going to give out a shout out for Jane Harris's Girls on Girls tomorrow night at Nighthawk. Linda Hamilton, Sigourney Weaver, Angelina Jolie. Sometimes Lena Dunham, Tina Fey, Lucy Liu, Jennifer Lawrence, and then Manifesta, like the great Jennifer Baumgartner, Amy Richards. Like, these people are Jezebels to me because I have, just like I brought in a book tonight because I bring several books with me whenever I need to feel empowered, and I'm like, I'm going to be talking. So I brought in one book that's called, the title of the book is called Cunt, and it's about like, okay, we can take that word back and it no longer has to carry the same connotations. And so in the same way, that's what I was trying to do with that project way back in 2007, Jezebel. It's like, okay, there are new connotations for this in this century, and things and context is everything, and it can change the way that we kind of interpret, a stereotype and then revivify it as something that is for the good and is empowered and represents strength. So.
I have to say, a lot of the Jezebels on your list would also be on my list.
Awesome.
I think about it. It's really nice. And you have a puzzled look on your face.
Oh, I was just like, I didn't even think about this question.
I just came up with.
I was like, I asked Carla, but I didn't even think about my own answers.
Well, I mean, this is kind of a good segue for me, I feel like, because you're talking about, you've been talking about, especially earlier with the Gloria Steinem quotes, this sort of, this idea that's quite popular that feminists are women that want to be greater than men or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to me, as you're someone who's doing a lot of work about women's perspective and feminism, and you collaborate a lot with your boyfriend or your
my
year
partner.
and a half long partner, if we want to be like real.
We say partner on this podcast.
I say partner with my partner, but only because I think boyfriend is kind of a cheesy word, and I feel like embarrassed. I like blush terribly every time I use it because it makes me feel like I'm like 14 or something. But how does that work? Like, working together all the time, collaborating and living together, do you still get along afterward? And also, like, how does it make you feel about your practice as a feminist, like working with the evil man.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the point, isn't it? That's kind of the point of what we're talking about, that like, it isn't about separation. It's not about that we are other. It's about we're all human beings. If an alien came down and looked at us, he would not be able to distinguish. Like, he wouldn't be able to distinguish, or it's funny, I'm using the he pronoun, by the way. Shit. It, the alien, whatever, would not be able to distinguish probably race, class, gender, all of these things that are so kind of like vital to us as a culture, and that are really polarizing. And so, the idea of working with a man or working with like a partner, it shouldn't be gendered, right? But like, we can't help but be gendered. We can't help but think about positionalities, and this is something he and I talk about all the time, and argue about. I mean, because sometimes he's like, I'm a bigger feminist than you are, and he really, like, okay, you guys, you girls, hey people. Last year he calls me up and he's like, okay, meet me at 7:00 in Manhattan, right, and at this location. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll just do this. And we get there, and it's a theater, and it's Wonder Women, the untold story of superheroines in American culture.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And he didn't know about your whole, like,
no, he already
studio
knew,
filled with...
He already knew, like, I have tons of Wonder Woman figurines and all of that in my studio. But he didn't let me know what it was about, and a friend of his had actually directed the film. Wait, let me see if I can give a shout out. I always love to give shout outs for the girls and the guys, but do I have it here? Well, it's Wonder Women, so the untold story of American superheroines. It's when Yeah, Wendy Davis. And no, Wendy Davis is the one
like,
who
Wendy
like no,
Davis
wait,
is
Wendy
probably-
Davis, like she's also a superheroine, but I'm not finding her name right now. Oh no, Krista Guevara Flanagan. Yeah. Okay, so shout out for the director of Wonder Woman. But anyway, he takes me there and I'm trying to be like really tough. I'm like, "Oh my god, this is awesome." And I'm like watching that and I just like start bawling cuz I'm just like, this is so important. This is so amazing to me. And I was just like, this is when I really knew like he was the partner that, you know, like in terms of personal relationships, it's really great to be with him, but also that like that was someone that I could work with as an artist.
And
that,
ideologically matched
like
up, yeah.
ideologically matched up. That's great. But you know, I mean, but it is interesting like when you live with someone and so you're living, breathing the project, you know, and
Yeah.
we're also we're not two artists. I mean, he's an artist, but he's a literary artist. He's a writer. So we're publishing a book together and we're also doing a show. And it's kind of, even though they're both creative acts, they have their own set of rules and their own set of parameters. And so we're having to negotiate those spaces as well. And that has proved at sometimes to be a challenge, but it's also been really exciting and dynamic because like as a visual artist, you know, I kind of think and resolve things in really particular ways that I'm trained to do so in. And then he'll just like totally rock my world. And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't think about it. I'm reading your words and I'm responding to your words. And I'm like, oh, right. And it's vice versa. I mean, he's, you know, given me props too, you know, for kind of, expanding his visions. So
you've collaborated with partners in the past, but do you and Gene collaborate? I mean, I guess he reads what you work on and stuff.
Gene is really instrumental for my work, and sometimes I also know the lens that he's coming from, so I think you have to take that for what it is and appreciate that for what it is. And he's really, really helpful a lot of the time. Like, some of the time, really not helpful.
Right. Just criticality.
But, like, it sounds like similar with you and Justin, it's like what I lack, he has.
Right.
So
right.
I kind of, like, I'm very Baroque. I'm, like, everywhere, all at once. I want everything. And he's more like, no, take away.
Edit, yeah.
Edit.
Yeah.
And so he definitely helps to edit me, which is really good.
That's vital, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I just like the idea, like, whomever you're collaborating with, if you choose to collaborate, that, you know, it doesn't have to be gendered. If, you know, it's two women who are collaborating, two men, whatever, like, if it's more about kind of the content, it's more about, like, our ability to kind of supersede those things, you know, like, that seems like we're going in the right direction. You know, and it becomes about storytelling. It becomes about humanity. It becomes about humanity that's evolving in relationship to technology and the singularity and the fact that, like, we one day may be different. There was a recent TED Talk where, you know, this guy is saying your children will be different from you. Like, no, distinctively different. I'm meaning, like, you know, like, brain wiring is changing and you won't even recognize certain behaviors, you know?
Right.
And so, like, in the midst of all of that, if you find someone you can work with, you know, and that, like, you can just groove with and jive with, and, you know, like, you have different practices, or you're working in different disciplines, and you find, like, some kind of, I'm thinking isthmus, but you find some kind of connection, you know, it's just a really awesome thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that also, like, what you said before, you said that Justin sometimes says that he is more of a feminist than you are, and, like, it's such an interesting statement because I think in a lot of ways men obviously cannot understand what women go through. Yeah. But at the same time, like, Gene, my partner, he
boyfriend,
my man friend, he has introduced me to things and opened my mind to things that I might have shut down because of my prejudices.
Yeah.
So I think, like, the majority of the time we say to ourselves, oh, the men, they don't know better than us because we're women, so we know about feminism. But sometimes they are able to be actually more open than us because we have our own prejudices ourselves because we are women, and they can kind of, like, shed a light on things that we might turn away from.
I mean, I had an ex-partner who told me, like, men cannot understand this piece, and I was like, fuck you!
A piece that you had
made.
I mean,
a piece that I made.
Right.
He was like, I'm sorry, like, I don't think any man who watches this can really understand it. And I was like, initially like, fuck you, you're an asshole, and you're a misogynist. And
that would be my initial response,
but
by the way.
But then I thought
too.
about it, and I was like, he's
Good.
right, and I think that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's, like, an important part of the work, actually, is that, like, it sheds light on the fact that there's this thing going on that, like, men can't understand. And I learned something from it.
He might not have thought that was an okay thing.
Yeah, he was.
Right.
It was his criticism, actually, which is his own problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's his problem, but it is interesting to get that kind of feedback.
Yeah,
and
it's
especially
helpful.
get that feedback from someone who, you know, at the time at least was kind of like involved with you and
Very
cared about you,
important-
right?
Very
and very
important, formative person in my life.
Yeah. And, you know, it is like what you both were saying. It's sometimes hard for us not to be myopic because we have a very distinct vision. And, you know, I will shout about the patriarchy as a conceptual trap because I studied it during my women's studies in undergraduate, you know, and, and it's like something that I just glom onto. And then I realized, oh, wait, you know, like someone is offering me a different perspective, whether they're male or female or trans or whatever, you know, and I need to be receptive to that. Like, that's something I think in terms of being an artist, like, is trying to always be a sponge and always be receptive, and that we aren't didactic, that we're not like social scientists, even if like sometimes our projects veer into that, but beyond that, like that, you know, we're not even... we can let our id out. Like, we're not even like totally always required to be responsible, you know, for our content, really, you know, and so we can experiment in these really interesting ways, and we should always be open to, you know, like
to making mistakes,
and new forms and interpretations that are somehow outside of our expectations,
or not politically correct,
and
being
I mean, fallible. I think that's like, there's this whole, I think, like, a lot of times with a lot of artist projects, there's the idea that the artist is infallible. And to me, that's, like, the most, like, ooh,
I think that's a huge problem with social practice, is this idea of the artist as this, like,
it's objective.
super, like, objective researcher, super, like, infallible. All of this is extremely problematic, especially with creative work and, like, I don't know, interpretation. Yeah,
I mean, there's the stereotypes of the artist or the poet, because, you know, my partner is a poet, you know, that we're just, like, highly emotive. And, you know what I mean? And in terms of visual artists, that, like, really hasn't been in play for a really long time.
Yeah, it's changing so
you know,
much.
Yeah. But, you know, whether the, like, highly emotive stereotype or, you know, the conceptual practice where the artist is completely detached and objective, like, neither of those work, because, like, we're way more complex than that. We're not robots, and we're not binary. We're not just zeros and ones. We're all the, like, mushy stuff in between, you know?
Cool. Okay, so last question, I think. So looking at your work, you obviously have a lot of, like, technical skills. Techie skills. You're a geek.
In the best way possible.
In the best way, obviously. And I think that's something that women are often discouraged from becoming. They're not always pushed towards having these technical skills. So I'm just wondering, where and how did you acquire your skills? And yeah, that's it.
That's a good question, particularly because another role I play, we've been talking about my art and my practice tonight, but I'm also involved in academia, and I'm at Pratt in the Department of Digital Arts, and you know, to get there was kind of an interesting and long and winding road for me, because I studied painting, and I studied kind of fifth generation abstract expressionist painting.
Me too.
Yeah, you know, you know, and it's really funny, and in a way that's kind of interesting, because like in a culture or in an art culture today where kind of it seems like not anything goes, but more goes. Like, to actually have something to react to or revolt against is kind of cool. And so I, like, rebelled against that painting background, you know. But also, interestingly enough, I must say, in terms of proclivities, that my dad is kind of a digital geek, right? And so as a kid, he took me to these, like, conferences. They're called SIGGRAPH. And so, you know, and I'm, like, studying oil painting, and I also studied classical piano. I was, like, I mean, this is a class thing, too. Both of my parents hadn't come from really wealthy families, and they were upwardly mobile, and I was their only child, and so they're like, let's put her in all the lessons. And I'm in the South, and so to be like, you know, the lady who's the dilettante too, by the way, it's like she's in piano, and she's in gymnastics, and she's in ballet, and she's in tap, and she's in her art lessons, and she just learns a little bit about you know, each one. and then I became really passionate about art and music, but also based on the influences in the environment, I was doing a more traditional thing. And my dad's just like, it was the reverse generation gap. My dad's like, you make art with computers. Like, this is completely possible. And, I'm like older than you two, but like my dad already had this kind of future vision for things. And, and I'm like, really? They're like, no, I'm going to make my paintings. And years later, when I got a NIFA grant in computer arts, my dad's like calling me up, see, I told you so. And but what's interesting about that is like I now help run a department where students learn how to use all of these tools, and it's so freaking exciting. It's so fucking exciting. I'm going to curse a little bit, and and I love it. But like I'm totally an autodidact. I have my master's, but like it was in painting, and so then I like hit the ground running. I moved to New York. I'm 24 years old. I started assisting artists. I started assisting artists who are using computers for their work, and I'm like, oh wow, Photoshop, Quark, all these things. I've got to learn this. I databased a library. And so I'm just learning these things fast. And I realized that I probably inherited kind of my dad's proclivities for this stuff. And I start picking it up and I just start teaching myself. And then I get web design jobs. I already mentioned to you guys that, early 2000s, we're all like, how can we make some money? And so I just, start learning and teaching myself and applying it, in a commercial way. But I have never been able to reconcile anything that I do during the day as a day job that doesn't filter into my art life and or my practice, other than running the marathon, almost everything else. And so like when I had this big web design job, I created Sister Gemini, my alter ego, who's a performance artist / web hacker who hacks into sites via QuickTimes and, sings mountain ballads with a, electric dulcimer, and like, I was like, I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to implement these tools. I can't make painting anymore. That's anachronistic. By the way, all my painter friends, I love what you do. But just for me personally, my practice, okay, that was my practice. It just seemed anachronistic to me. And so I moved on. And so, and then along the way, I just kept getting faster and faster and faster. And then fortunately enough, I, started to teach this. And once you're, teaching something like an application that you use for your own practice, you can be a one-trick pony. But once you start imparting it to someone else and you actually have to know it kind of deeply and you have to actually be able to break it down into like its kind of basic structure, then you're like, oh wow, yeah. And that's been really, kind of amazing too. And the one thing though, in terms of, digital arts, is I feel like we're finally getting to the point. I've been teaching for about 7 or 8 years, but we're finally getting to the point, in these programs where, it's not just about the pyrotechnics. It's not just about the algorithms. It's not just, but like now we can actually talk content, and I can talk with my students and I can be like, okay, let's talk body politics. Let's talk about stuff that was going on not that I want to be retroactive, but it does this, but why? And it's not just cool that it works. It has to say something. And we're finally no longer nascent. We're finally at the point where, it can resonate in various ways. And one of those can be like the content and the message, and particularly, okay, I'll say this, like with some, of the women that are coming into the field, because we all know, statistically speaking, I used to be a UI designer at game companies, that statistically speaking, it's a male-dominated field. Yeah. And like the women who are coming in, I'm like, explore identity politics, explore the stuff, be subversive. This is a cool thing. Push the media, in new ways. And that's really exciting.
No, I love the title of the talk you organized, Beyond the Algorithm, the content of
that
tech
you were
art.
in and you rocked out.
Oh, thank you. Also mentioned Anne in that, of course.
And I did mention you, yes, this is true. Yes, because you were my Jezebels, and you were like, I like my.
But there's, just that title alone. When you proposed it, I was just like, yeah, this is great. We can talk about
the content of tech art,
the beyond the surface, because I feel like that's what at least mainstream media is always attracted to. Like, it's just sort of like the Vine. Like, it's not an art piece. It's not anything. It's a Vine. It's a tech. It's new tech. Tech is sexy. Tech. And it's sort of like, let's talk about...
Yeah, let's talk about other things. Because, like, when when I first got to New York and I was looking at art, I mean, admittedly, I'll say I wasn't looking at tech art. You know, I was looking at YBA artists because this is, you know, the 90s, you know, and I'm like, I was looking at Tracy Emin. I was looking at Sarah Lucas. I was, you know, looking at those artists. And then I was like, but I'm really interested in computers, you know, and then I start looking at games. And, you know, and I think a lot of digital artists have learned. And this is something that's really interesting in terms of, and cut me off anytime we're over time, but like in terms of, you know, are we at time?
Just finish.
Okay, I'll
we'll
finish this thought. I'll try to be succinct. But you know, like a lot of female artists in the 50s, 60s, and 70s started to leave painting because they felt like, how do I deal with my fractured identity? And so they started to experiment with new forms. They started to experiment with performance. They started to experiment with conceptual art and a lot of these things. And so it felt really natural to me to like start working with new technologies because I was like, oh, wow, I don't fit in the old boy painting school. And where can I go? You know? And I'm looking at a lot of people who were kind of more mainstream art world, and then, you know, I'm using these technologies and then start just kind of finding my way.
Yeah.
And as I'm finding my way, I'm also seeing this entire kind of, can we say, field or genre like grow and start to explode and become like a vital, you know, kind of thing in and of itself.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
On that note, we should thank, of course, Carla for coming in.
Thank you so much,
This was
Carla.
the shit. Carla, if you want to shout out to your website or anything you have coming up.
Oh, yeah. Okay, carlagannis.com, really easy. That's Gannis. And Justin, my partner who I was talking about earlier, he and I have a book that will be published in September through Jaded Ibis Press. And we also have a show at Transfer Gallery in Bushwick. Woo-hoo! And that is also opening in September, and we're super psyched about that. And then we have a couple of other events that you can find out about on my website, carlagannis.com. Thanks so much. You both rock Jezebels.
We have so much fun.
It was awesome. We also have some plugs of our own this week.
Yes, please.
I've curated, and Anne is participating in, along with several other really awesome performance artists, including Jennifer Chan, who's mentioned tonight, Michelle Levy, Nathaniel Sullivan, who's on the show before.
He was great.
Alex Young, my partner, or boyfriend, or man friend, or whatever. And if I've forgotten anybody, I'm so sorry. But that is on Sunday, this Sunday, at 12 p.m. at Glass House in Williamsburg. And Anne will be performing as her alter ego. Am I right?
Jason Biddies.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jason is going to explore different tropes of ethnic masculinities, something like that.
Oh yeah, and I'm doing a performance where I'm going to use all of the wisdom imparted by Patty Stanger to me from Millionaire Matchmaker to tell you how you can, what you need to do to be millionaire worthy, and also what you're already doing wrong. So that's what I'm going to do.
And then also, I am doing a reading on Friday, July 19th at 8:30 p.m. It's part of Gabby, a.k.a. Gabby Bess. Her book launch for her book, Alone with Other People, which is a really great book. And I'm reading with some really great women for that event. Melissa Broder, Bunny Rogers, Sarah Jean Alexander, Lucy K. Shaw, Laura Marie Marciano, and Gabby herself. And that's at Acme Studios in Williamsburg. And it's going to be really great.
Sweet.
Yeah. Illuminati Girl Gang.
Pretty much.
Gabby's really awesome
Pretty
project. Okay, so I hope that you enjoyed this somewhat longer than an hour of A-Cups! And we look forward to hopefully having Kathy Nardone from Frank the Entertainer in a Basement Affair next week.
And Howard Stern.
Oh, Miss Howard Stern
Miss
TV,
Howard Stern
August
TV.
2012. Woo! All right. Thanks for listening. Bye.